Susan, welcome to Mediators Talk. It's a rainy day in California. How is Chicago?
Well, Chicago, yeah, is an entirely different world than California, but I've acclimated and I found there's a great deal going on there. So I'm enjoying being in Chicago. I do miss California, though.
The advantage of being on Zoom, we can be anywhere. That's fantastic.
Exactly.
Well, It's my pleasure to introduce the audience of Mediators Talk to Susan Guthrie. She's our nation's top family law attorney and a mediator with 30 years of experience. She's a fantastic person. And she is also the host and the producer of an amazing podcast. It's called Divorce and Beyond. It's one of the top self-help podcasts on all platforms. I think you had about 3 million followers, correct?
Yeah, just coming up on 4. So I'm pretty excited.
Amazing. Also, she is the founder of Mostyn Guthrie Academy, teaching basically everybody to mediate, which is amazing. And I would like to learn more about it. And if you want to know more about her, I think it's very helpful to visit her website. That's called divorceinaBetterWay.com. And to follow her on Instagram, of course. But let's start talking. So why divorce in a better way?
I think that's it's such a good question because people don't realize there are different ways to get divorced. And I think that's one of my main messages for people, especially after being immersed in the divorce world for 30 plus years, is that it doesn't have to be just that one way that everyone, I think, immediately thinks of in that default of everyone lawyers up. It's a horrible experience. You fight things out and a judge, decides what's going to happen with your stuff and with your children. There are a variety of other ways you can go through your divorce. And in fact, almost any of them other than litigation are better ways to go through divorce. You know that my main focus is a mediated approach to divorce, but there's collaborative, there's a negotiated settlement, there's sitting down at your kitchen table or Starbucks and figuring it out for yourselves. So almost any way other than the traditional fashion, I would say, is the better way to get divorced.
So I'm curious, how did you make the switch from attorney to mediation? And what's your passion for mediation? So we know a little bit more about you and your journey.
Yeah, for me, it was a gradual transition, not because I'm not firmly really, entrenched in the mediative mindset. I just didn't really know it was an option. When I went to law school, so long ago, we had no alternative dispute resolution courses in school. Mediation was not a part of our curriculum. And in fact, when I went out to work for a law firm and really learned to be a divorce attorney at the heels or on the feet of my partners and colleagues, mediation was not an approach that anyone talked about. So what I learned was to litigate a divorce. And I was good at that. I liked litigation for me going into a courtroom and, going through that process was interesting and fun and caused me to use my brain and my skill sets. And so for me, it was a positive. What I noticed was that it was not a positive for clients. In general, it was a very divisive process that left people who were already unhappy at the beginning even more unhappy when it was over, when the judgment was entered, whether that be by gavel or by agreement. And it also is very wearing to day in and day out be involved in a process where families are literally and figuratively being torn apart. And so I was searching for that better way. And it was actually a colleague who had a non-adversarial practice. And she reached out to me because she knew I was struggling just with the philosophy of litigation. And she introduced me to mediation. And it was kind of no looking back from there. Once I knew there was a better way, it's always been the better way.
Wow. I remember you mentioned that people have a very interesting reaction after taking your classes at the academy. And is that a kind of the switch that you see from attorneys into mediators? Would you talk a little bit about that? I think everybody's interested.
Yeah, it's such a transformational moment. I love that you brought that up, that we talked about that before, because we do 40-hour divorce mediation training courses through Mostyn Guthrie. And we've done a couple of them since we started the academy last year. And on the very last day of a very intensive 10-day training, I would say probably 2/3 of our trainees in the 40 some odd person classes are divorce litigators who are looking to transition their practice. The other participants are usually coming from the mental health fields, financial fields, but universally, really among all professionals, but definitely among my colleagues in the divorce litigation world, there's that aha moment and that feeling of relief to find that there is a better way to help people through the process. And, we actually, in our last class that ended about a month ago, we go around the room and do a Quaker circle and ask everyone what the training has meant, what they're going to do on Monday as they go forward into their new practice. And people were actually crying, tears of either relief or joy or happiness at knowing that they've now added something to their toolkit that will let them help people do what we know needs to be done. We know these people need to get uncoupled somehow, but now we have a better way to do it for them. And it's really a wonderful experience to realize and see people grow themselves professionally when they realize there is this alternative way to help people.
This is such an important work, and I'm, thank you for doing it. I've seen it. I recently graduated a couple of years ago, and I'm a filmmaker, I'm an artist. And when I entered law school, it was shocking to see what I observed as an artist anyway, because this country is very centered on competition. And don't take me wrong, I'm very competitive. I love it. But there is an extreme. And I think in the last years, we've seen this on so many levels. Like it's this split and polarization that happened from political arena to personal lives. And it's an obsession to do things that almost, I feel like the pandemic was like a blessing in disguise, and we all had to take a pause to revise that attitude. But I saw this, extreme competition and people being unhappy and not knowing how to get out of that litigation mindset and being in pain. So I'm not surprised that they're actually crying, because I think we all need to get into the mediator's shoes in a everyday life, all of us, not only attorneys, but yes. So thank you for your work. That's an amazing journey. It's this new. When did you start at the academy?
We just started it at the end of 2020. So into the pandemic, Woody Forrest Mostyn, who's really one of the seminal characters, one of the leading names in family mediation, who I've known, I've flown around the country to take Woody's training. So when he approached me and said he had this vision for an online academy where we could bring really cutting edge and high level sort of gold standard training for mediators to the world, because we've had people who are able to beam in because we're online and take these trainings. It's really been an amazing experience. We've had 4 trainings since we started. Every single one of them has sold out, and we have 4 or 5 already in the pipeline for 2021, and we're already starting to plan out into 2022. So there's one of the, you mentioned sort of a silver lining to the pandemic. And although that may be hard to contemplate for some people, which I agree, there's been a great deal of tragedy that has come as well. But in the pause, there have also been that hard stop that hard driving world that we're normally a part of sort of went into. There have been some benefits. And one of them is with the shift online, Mediation has moved online. The availability has become much more accessible to people because it's available online. So when the courts weren't available, people who would not normally have found mediation found us and found this alternative path. And I think that has been actually, I've heard colleagues say they think the world of mediation has moved forward 10 years in less than a year, on just the public's knowledge of what we do and the availability of a mediated settlement. Has really moved forward a great deal. And that is maybe for everyone one of the silver linings of COVID.
Yeah, I agree. Where can we find you online with Academy? What's the link?
It's super easy, mostynguthrie.com. So, and we have all of our trainings on there and our study groups and what Woody and I are doing. We both speak at a lot of conferences and do a lot of projects as well. So all of that's on the website.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned that mediation got, kind of forward with this. And I think it's amazing. But on the other hand, I would like to talk a little bit of how the pandemic affected the family law, in general, because we know divorces are up. It's been hard, especially for people who are, not necessarily like in a position to just support themselves right now. It's so intense. And I would like to have your opinion. What's happening right now? What did you see in terms of like the hardest part in family law? If you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because that statistic that divorce is up has been widely sort of disseminated. But when you go and do a dive into the statistic itself, the only one that I've been able to find, and I myself have quoted it, but said that divorce was up 43%. But when you dive behind that statistic, it turns out people Googling divorce forms and information is what is up 43%. The real fact is most courthouses have been closed or limited in access. So just by reason of that, people have not actually been able to file or pursue divorces through legal channels. So it's actually that the divorce rate, if you go to the courthouse statistics on filing, they're actually down as our marriages, because it's been harder to get married because weddings aren't happening. So it's an interesting thing. And one of the things I would posit is many people, just by reason of not being able to access the court system, have been living in sort of a limbo state of wanting a divorce but not able to get it. But I also believe that many people have shifted to finding mediators to help them through the divorce process. And, I have a few going right now myself where we haven't even filed the paperwork yet because we're working through the details of their divorce. We're doing it online at their own pace, and we'll file everything when they're ready, when it's finalized. So one of the states I'm licensed in is also, in addition to California, is Connecticut. And in Connecticut, if you mediate your divorce, you can just file everything all at once at the end. So it's an interesting thing because I do think that people have found the pandemic has raised and quarantine has raised issues in relationships that were already struggling or put strain on relationships. There have been money issues. There have been medical issues. There have been issues where, two parents now are working out of the same house with children who are going to school in the home. No one's leaving. I mean, it's really put strain on relationships. Flip of that, people have been challenged to find better ways to communicate. They've been challenged to work through issues rather than just ignoring them because they can go off to work and ignore each other for the day and just, not deal with it. So in some ways, I think we've worked on our relationships, found better ways to do things. And in other ways, I think that those relationships that were already struggling are probably going to find their way, to divorce in some fashion. The plus sign would be hopefully they know now that mediation is available. and that they don't have to immediately go, to that default adversarial litigation.
I mean, in a strange way, that's fantastic because we both are advocates for mediation. And to be honest, it's a funny story between us because I think you mediated you actually introduced me to mediation 8 years ago. I was going through a separation, which ended up in divorce, and you were in Connecticut, a friend of a friend. When I saw you, I was like, I know you. And I was like, oh my God. And as an immigrant in this country, I had no idea what my options are. And I was the one living. And then you pointed out of my rights. And, we ended up doing a divorce very amicable between ourselves. But it was amazing to meet you on many levels.
Right? Such a small world, right?
It's such a small, and I had no idea I'm going to become a mediator. Like, that's another thing. But it's quite amazing that, I'm a fairly educated, and I had no clue what options are. And I know right now people are still discovering mediation, especially in family law. And it's so important to have, as you said, a better way, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting. And I love that you mentioned, you didn't know about it. You're an educated person out there in the world. I have met family law attorneys who really have no concept of what divorce mediation is. I remember when I first moved to California from Connecticut, I went to some of the local bar association meetings, family law section meetings, and I would talk to other family law colleagues there. And when I mentioned I was a mediator, most of them automatically defaulted to thinking that meant I was in the court doing that court mandated, 1 hour of meeting. And I was like, no, I help people from point A, we want to get a divorce, to this is, our final judgment, we're going to get divorced, where they never set foot in a courtroom. And they honestly had no concept of what I was talking about. That's not their fault. It's mediators aren't getting the word out well enough. The world of litigation has a very strong hold on all types of conflict resolution. And it's really a matter of doing podcasts like this. I go out and speak to Rotaries and breakfast clubs, and I do my podcast, I have 2 podcasts. And really, we all need to get that word out there for people and educate the public, because facts are, sooner or later, the people who are hearing us talk about divorce mediation might be getting a divorce, or someone they know will need the information. And that's what you want. You want them to go, didn't I hear some woman talking about, a better way to do this? I want to know more about that,
And I love your tagline. It's perfect. A better way to do this is totally right. It's totally true.
I've seen both sides, I've been through it myself. And, I've been the divorce litigator and I've been the divorce mediator. So I see people leave the courtroom in both situations. The people who leave the courtroom in a litigated divorce do not usually leave on particularly good terms. I've had people walk out of the final hearing for their mediated divorce hand in hand, with their arms around each other, going out to lunch, going forward into their new life. As a couple that knows it didn't work out, but they made their decisions together on how to restructure their family together with respect and in the best way they could.
Well, ultimately, you're a peacemaker, and mediators are peacemakers. And it always kind of strikes me because it's justice of peace, right? It's not just justice. And when I entered law, because I enter with such an open mind and completely from the different perspective, I was looking at all these elements and I was questioning the very core, right? It's justice of peace. You're not supposed to be at war at the end. So, I mean, why not, right? To realize that it's just another phase. And I browsed through your Instagram and I loved the fact that you said at one point, it's okay to fall apart. Tacos fall apart sometimes and we still love them.
I have a taco thing. I like my tacos. So, hey, I lived in Southern California for a couple of years. You have to love tacos.
Please come back.
Yes.
Yeah, we would love to have you here more often and talk
Me
to us.
too. As soon as COVID's over, San Diego is my first stop, then LA.
So I'm curious, what's the worst pattern that you've seen in mediation from the people, and like a trap, right? That you would see, and what's your advice for younger mediators who are faced with this type of trap? How to solve it?
What I think we see fairly often is where a couple will come to mediation not because they're actually looking for that better way to divorce, how to best make decisions to move their family forward. But very often you will see a situation where one party has sort of talked the other party into coming into mediation. And it's usually because they think that without it being in a litigated space where the other party has an attorney arguing and advocating for them, they'll be able to talk them into what they want, get their agreement to things because they have more control. And then they quickly find out that's not really how mediation works. That's not really how the process unfolds, as long as you have a skilled mediator or an experienced mediator. For a younger mediator, I know that can be a real issue, right? Where you see an unequal power balance. I mean, think about most relationships, that usually there's something of a power imbalance or a dynamic between a couple. And when they bring that dynamic into the mediation room, for a younger mediator or a less experienced mediator, sometimes that will throw it off, where they can tell there's some subtle influencing going on, or maybe not even that subtle. Sometimes they're pretty overt, right?
For sure.
Well, Mary, you don't really want the house. We've talked about that. Just tell her you don't want the house. I've seen that kind of a discussion go on. It can be difficult for a new mediator to work through that dynamic. My first tip on that sort of a situation is I usually will separate the two people, go into caucus at that point. When I went to my mediation training probably 12, 13 years ago now, I remember being told, well, you never caucus in a family law mediation. You always have them together. You always are working, together. And I do think there's a lot of benefits to having the two people on the same screen together. But frankly, especially when you're dealing with that power balance dynamic, I find it very helpful to be able to talk to the two parties separately, because you can really do some coaching on communication for the person who needs a little support, and help them to be able to self-advocate, and maybe get them the right support team as well. They might need a consulting attorney. They might need a coach to help them in the process. I'm a firm believer in team building in mediation. Just because you're mediating doesn't mean that the mediator is all things to all clients. There are a number of other professionals who can be extremely helpful to the parties in supporting them.
Yeah, there's a whole kind of outside help that you can get. But I'm going to add a personal anecdote here, because when I met you in Connecticut, I didn't know who you were, and you were a friend of my husband's side of the family, and we sat with you. And I remember how skillful you were, because I was very scared, and I was the one that came basically with nothing and contemplating to live with nothing. And we were in the room together, and you said very clearly, these are your rights. This is what's happening. And I could not believe that somebody had, in such a nice and very easy way, putting very clear boundaries and very beautifully kind of saying, yes, but this is what you have and this is what you have. And after we got out, my ex went kind of crazy, like, what do you mean you can just sue me? I was like, no, that was just a reminder of what my rights are. And I was so grateful, because I had no idea, so that was an amazing moment. And you did it so elegantly and so peacefully. That, it provoked
glad I did.
No, I mean, I would never forget that. I mean, because I was like, wow, okay. And, and it gave me and empowered me in a way that I didn't ask for anything, but I was in a different position heart-wise. And, like, I was like, okay, this is how I can move forward.
It's such a wonderful point that you're making for anyone who might be listening, is that for mediators, one of our most important roles is to make sure that the parties are making informed choices. Exactly. I think one of the biggest fears about mediation, people are afraid, since they don't know the law around divorce, as you just mentioned, right? You didn't know what your rights were. Right. People are afraid to try mediation because they're like, well, I'm going to end up not getting what's fair or what I'm entitled to, or all those phrases we use. But it's a valid fear. It's not your world. It's not your playground. So somebody, and in a mediated case, it's the mediator. It's part of our job to make sure that both parties are fully informed so they can make informed decisions. Now, does that mean that they need to be told, well, this is what the law is and that is what you have to do? That's not mediation, but you do need to know what the law is. And that needs to be put out in what I hopefully did was in a neutral fashion. Well, if it's helpful to know this is what the law would call for. This is what the law says on these particular issues. And that is, it's wonderful you pointed out, because that is another way to level that playing field when you have the unequal bargaining positions. And sometimes the inequality is exactly what you're talking about, somebody's lack of knowledge on a topic.
Totally. And it was so amazing because first you're scared, right? You're totally scared because it's a major change. And even if you think you're not, you're still scared. And and then, in that particular case, it was biased because you came from my husband's side. And I, normally you think, okay, you're not gonna, who is this person? But I'm like, I'm curious and I'm pretty smart. So I was like, okay, let's do this. I'm gonna listen. And that opened a door for me to a different perspective on this whole process, because I was like, oh, look at someone who actually comes from one particular side, but who can stay very neutral. And I respect that so deeply,
Well, and you point out another really important part, right, for the parties to understand that you came in, and I think mediators need to always be cognizant of this. You came in with a perhaps concern that, well, this mediator is coming in by recommendation through my husband's side of the fence. Maybe she's not that neutral, and that's a very valid concern as well. And so everything that we do and everything that we say to people, we need to always be realizing that had nothing to do with anything I had ever done. You hadn't even met me before you came in yet. But just because it came through a recommendation through your husband's family, that can start to unlevel that playing field as well, right? Well, but that's we're humans. We're human beings, and we're going to think that. And that's another reason why that neutrality, which, by the way, for attorneys can be very difficult to learn. Neutrality, I think people that come from other backgrounds are mental health professionals, financial professionals, people who become mediators, those who get masters and PhDs in dispute resolution, but haven't come from a practicing lawyer background, have an advantage because neutrality is more perhaps comfortable for them. Attorneys go for 3 years to law school having advocacy drummed into our brains. And then I spent another 20 years of doing it in a courtroom. So it was difficult to build that neutrality mindset. But it's such a critical component, because imagine if you had gone into that initial discussion and felt that your fear was was enforced, that I said or did one thing. It would have just taken one comment out of, just taken that as not neutral. And you would have been lost from the mediative process altogether in that moment.
Correctly. And
For
to
good
be
reason.
honest, that one moment stayed with me throughout the school. Like I had my master's and I'm completely coming from a different perspective. And thank you for pointing that out, because I think there's an emotional intelligence that comes from people who are like outside, because you're not locked in that defense or like attack mentality. That's so helpful. And I think, I learned that from you. Strangely enough, I saw you like 7 years later. I was like, I know that person. She was major. And I'm
Wasn't
so
that
grateful.
interesting too, that we met on one coast and re-met on another coast? And
It's
it
unbelievable.
really shows how small the world is.
Yes, yes. And then when there's a calling or a destiny, I don't know. Well, Susan, I would love to end with what I call the rapid fire questioning. So we
Okay.
end on a fun note. And I would love everybody to go and again visit your website. It's divorceinaBetterWay.com. Find Susan on Instagram. She's amazing. I hope I just demonstrated that. So here are my rapid fire questions. Divorce is,
An opportunity,
mediation is.
a better way to divorce.
What is the lesson you feel you are still learning while mediating, or what was the hardest lesson you had to learn as a mediator?
Exactly what we just talked about, how to always maintain that neutrality.
Favorite taco?
Oh, well, Southern California, it's got to be a fish taco.
Fish taco. I
Taco.
for that. And best self-love technique that you apply for yourself when things fall apart?
Oh gosh, my self-care Sundays. I try to always dedicate Sundays to me, just decompressing and letting it all go. So self-care Sundays, very important.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. It's such a pleasure to reconnect through the years and through the stories that, somehow were meant to be.
No,
Well,
absolutely. Thank you for having me, because this is such a wonderful opportunity to get to talk to you and your colleagues at the Beverly Hills Bar Association. And as you know, I just love to get the word out. I really want everyone to know.
for sure, me too. And I'm very grateful for my team here. And Beverly Hills Bar Association is amazing. Let's get this out. It's divorceinaBetterWay.com. Find Susan Guthrie on podcasts and on Instagram. She's funny and she's amazing. And family law needs mediation. This is so important these days. And that's our kind of what we stand for. Thank you.
Thank you.